Level 1. Rankless. You were 22, standing in a strip mall recruiting office on a Tuesday afternoon, and the man across the desk slid a piece of paper at you that did not promise you a green beret. It promised you a chance to try for one. 18 X-ray. That was what they called the contract. Out of every 100 people who walked in off the street and signed it, somewhere between 10 and 15 ever wore the beret. You signed it anyway. Then he asked you a question you were not ready for. He asked whether you had ever studied a foreign language. You said no. He wrote something down. And a few weeks later, a form came back with a language printed on it. One you had never spoken, never studied, and could not have found on a map. Nobody explained why. You assumed it was paperwork. It was not. And it would take you 3 years to understand why. The building you reported to had 3 words over the door. Deo presso lever. You looked at them every morning for the next 2.5 years. Nobody translated them for you. You never asked. It seemed like the kind of thing you were supposed to already know. And you thought you understood what was coming. You thought this was a fitness problem. You thought the thing standing between you and that beret was the mountain, the rucks, the cold, the sleep you were never going to get. You were preparing for the wrong test. Because the exam that ended more of these careers than the mountain ever did lasted 2 weeks. It happened in a country that does not exist. And you could fail it because one man decided he did not like you. Level 2, candidate. 2.5 years, and still nobody salutes you. Airborne school first. 5 jumps, wings on your chest, and it was easy enough that you let yourself believe you were close. That was the trap. It was the last thing in the pipeline that worked the way you expected. Then, selection. 3 weeks out in the sand hills of North Carolina, and the thing nobody prepares you for is not the wait. It is the silence. They handed you a map, a compass, a rucksack, and a point on the ground. No distance, no time limit, no pass mark. You would finish a movement, and an instructor with no expression would write something on a clipboard, and you would never learn what it said. Somewhere between 57 and 75% of the men who start it do not finish. There was a man who moved beside you for most of the first week. He was stronger than you, and faster, and better on the land navigation than you were ever going to be. On day 11, he sat down on his rucksack and did not get back up. A truck came, and he was gone before dinner. Remember him. You will think about him again at the end of this. Then the qualification course, where they made you pick a trade off a board with 4 columns painted on it. Weapons, engineer, medic, communications. You came out a weapons man. Then the classroom. 6 days a week, learning the language off that form from 3 years earlier, and finding out you could be removed from all of this for failing it. Grown men who had never quit anything sat there at 11 at night with flashcards, quietly panicking, because the thing about to end them was grammar. And then they drove you into a country called Pineland. Pineland does not exist. Somebody built it. A whole made-up nation with a history, a deposed government, and a resistance movement, all written down in a packet you memorized like a man studying for the bar. Your job was to find the guerrillas and build them into something that could take their own country back. Then the truck stopped, and you got out, and you understood where you actually were. You were in North Carolina. The exercise ran across something like 15 to 26 real counties. Moore, Randolph, Hoke, Chatham. Real farms, real towns, real people asleep in them. And the people were in on it. The old man who checked your papers at a roadblock was a volunteer. So was the woman who fed you, and the family whose barn you slept in, and the teenager who informed on your position and seemed to enjoy it. Your first meeting with the guerrilla commander went badly. You came in with a plan. He listened to all of it, then told you his men had not eaten properly in 3 days and asked what you intended to do about that. You had no answer. The plan had quietly assumed he worked for you. He did not. You had no authority over any man in that camp. Everything you wanted done had to be done by people who were completely free to tell you no. So you changed. You ate what they ate in the order they ate it, which meant last. You learned the names of his section leaders. You asked him what the plan should be, then used some of it and told his men it had been his idea. And somewhere in that second week, you worked out what they had been grading the whole time. It was not your shooting. It was rapport. The commander was writing an assessment of you, and he could reject you for any of it. For talking down to him. For giving orders instead of building trust. A candidate 2 farms over, better than you at nearly everything measurable, ran his camp like a man already promoted. His fighters stopped turning up to training. Then he was gone, and nobody had fired a shot at him. 2.5 years after that recruiting office, a sergeant major handed you a green beret. And then you reported to a team where you were the newest and least useful man in the room. Level 3, Sergeant. E5, your first real rank on a team, and it bought you nothing. Operational Detachment Alpha, 12 men. You were the junior weapons sergeant, which meant you were the junior everything. Nobody was impressed by your beret because every man in that room had one. Your job was weapons, and the first thing your senior did was hand you a rifle you had never seen. Because here is what nobody tells you about being the weapons man on an A team. You are not there to be a good shot with American equipment. You are there to be fluent in whatever the people you are training already carry. Soviet rifles, belt-fed machine guns older than your father, things bought, captured, or inherited 3 wars ago. You spent a year learning weapons that your own army does not issue. And you finally learned why the team carries 2 of every specialty. Your team sergeant drew it on a whiteboard. 12 men, 1 line straight down the middle. 2 teams of 6, each half with its own weapons, man, engineer, medic, and signaler. 2 missions, 2 valleys, at the same time. The team was not built to be strong in one place. It was built to be in 2 places. And that raised a question you had not thought to ask him. Why would 12 men ever need to cover that much ground? He said you would work it out. And the team room had a rule nobody ever wrote down. You did not offer opinions for about a year. Not because anybody told you to be quiet. Everything you were about to suggest had already been tried, in a country you had never been to, by a man sitting 4 feet away. And it had not worked, for reasons you did not yet know. So you listened. You cleaned weapons nobody asked you to clean. You learned the names of everybody's wives. The first time your senior weapons sergeant took one of your suggestions, it was about a sight setting the partner force kept getting wrong, and it took him about 4 seconds to say yes. You thought about that for a week. Level 4, Staff Sergeant. E6, the rank where nobody carries you anymore. 4 months in, you were on your first deployment, and it looked nothing like the recruiting videos. There was no assault. There was a schoolhouse with no roof, a platoon of local soldiers in mismatched uniforms, and a range you built yourself out of dirt berms and scrap timber. You spent 11 weeks teaching marksmanship to men who had been handed rifles. Nobody ever taught them to zero. You ran the same drill 50 times. You fixed the same 3 mistakes in the same 4 men. You drank an industrial quantity of tea. And the most useful thing you did on that entire rotation had nothing to do with weapons. You noticed their squad leader was embarrassed to ask questions in front of his own men, so you started taking him aside afterward, alone, and answering the things he had not asked. Within a month, he was correcting his own soldiers without you in the room. That was the win. Nobody was going to make a film about it. You wrote it up as partner force capability improved, and you understood for the first time that the paperwork was describing the actual mission and not a consolation prize. And this was where the language stopped being a school subject. 3 years earlier, a man in a recruiting office had written something on a form, and you had assumed it was paperwork. Now you were sitting on an ammunition crate in the shade with a man twice your age, and you were speaking it badly, with a terrible accent and about a third of the vocabulary you needed. He corrected you, he laughed at you, he kept talking to you. That is the part a classroom cannot teach, and the reason the Army spends a year of your life on it. An interpreter can move information between 2 people. He cannot make one of them trust the other. Level 5, Sergeant First Class. E7, now the weapons on that team were yours. Not a piece of them, all of them. As the senior weapons sergeant, you no longer carried out a training program. You wrote it. For a foreign battalion, in a country where you were outnumbered several thousand to 1, and every man you trained was free to walk away. And this is where you finally understood what you had been made into. You were never hired to be a shooter. There are units in the American military built to be the finest door kickers on earth, and this is not one of them. Special Forces was built to do something stranger, and honestly harder. You go into a country where you know nobody. You find people who already want to fight for their own home, and you turn them into an army. 12 men, generating a force hundreds or thousands of times their own size. It has a name, force multiplier, and every step of that ladder was building toward it. That is why they gave you a language before they gave you a beret. It is also why the final exam graded rapport. You cannot train a militia you cannot speak to, and you cannot lead men who do not like you. You wanted to know whether it actually worked. So you asked the man who had been there. Your team sergeant did not talk about Afghanistan. Not in the team room. Not at the bar. Not when the younger guys pushed. Then one night on a rotation, sitting outside with nothing else to do, he told you. October 2001. Weeks after the towers came down, a helicopter crossed the Hindu Kush out of Uzbekistan into northern Afghanistan, through wind and sandstorm and snow, and put 12 Green Berets on the ground near a village called Dehi. 12 men. Against the government? They found the Northern Alliance, and then they did the job. The same job they had taught you in a barn in Moore County. Learn the commander, earn the commander, make his fighters better than they were the day before. And the ground would not take vehicles, so they got on horses. He said that part flatly, like a logistics detail. 12 Americans riding to a battle on horseback, calling in 21st century air power from the back of an animal. The first American cavalry charge since the Second World War. On the 10th of November, they and their Afghan allies took Mazar-e-Sharif. Inside about 2 months, a handful of detachments doing that same unglamorous work had removed the Taliban from power. 12 men did not win that. 12 men built an army that won it. You asked him what it felt like. He thought about it for a while. Then he said it felt like the Afghans won, and they had helped. There is a statue near where the towers came down. A soldier on a horse. Those same 3 words are cut into it. He told you he had never gone to see it. Level 6, 18 Foxtrot. Still a sergeant first class, in an entirely different job. You put the weapons down for good. Your job now was intelligence. You decided where the team went and what it did when it got there. Target folders, human intelligence, route studies, which village matters, and why. You went from the best shooter in the room to the man in the corner with a map and a stack of reporting nobody else wanted to open. It was the first job that frightened you, because you could no longer fix a bad day with effort. A target folder is not what the movies made it look like. It is a boring document. Who lives here, who they are related to, which road floods, which family has a grievance with which other family, and how far back it goes. Who actually decides things in a village where the man with the title decides nothing. You built those. For months. And once, you got it wrong. You assessed the village as friendly on the strength of one meeting and a good lunch, and your team walked into 3 days of quiet hostility that could have gone much worse than it did. Nobody was hurt. Your team sergeant did not shout at you. He asked you one question, which was what you had used to decide, and then he waited while you heard your own answer out loud. You never built a folder that thin again. And it is harder than fighting for one reason. You do not control the outcome. You could build the best militia company in the province, train them, equip them, plan alongside them, and then watch their commander do something politically necessary and militarily foolish. And you did not get a vote. You advised. He decided. The moment you forget that, you stop being an advisor and start being an occupier, which is the exact failure the entire course is built to breed out of you. Some of the men you trained were superb. Some were in it for reasons you did not like. Most were somewhere in between, the way people are. You learned to work with all 3. Level 7, warrant officer. The rank you did not take. There was another ladder running beside yours, and one day somebody asked whether you wanted to step onto it. 180 Alpha, the Special Forces warrant officer. He is the assistant detachment commander, and almost every one of them is a former team sergeant or senior sergeant who converted across. Here is why that matters. Officers rotate. A captain commands a detachment for 2 or 3 years, and then goes to staff, to school, to a company, to a career that pulls him further from a team every time he gets promoted. The warrant officer never has to leave. He is the man who has been doing this for 25 years and intends to die doing it. He carries the memory of the detachment. He knows which valley went wrong in 2009 and why. He is the reason a team can lose every officer it has and still function on Monday. Day to day, he was the man who made the detachment work. Mission planning. The 800 small pieces of getting 12 men and their equipment into a country and back out of it again. The problems that have no doctrine, only precedent. And he was the precedent. Teams fought to keep a good one. Losing your warrant officer hurt more than losing your captain, and everybody on that team knew it, including the captain. You turned it down. You wanted the team, not the technical ladder. You would think about that decision again later. Level 8, Captain. The rank above you that answered to you. 18 Alpha, Detachment Commander, a captain, and on paper the man in charge of everything you did. Your first one was 29 and had never run a detachment. He arrived with rank, a good education, and a fraction of your experience, to lead 12 men who each knew their trade better than he knew it. 2 of them had been doing this longer than he had been in the army. And here's the quiet truth of an A-team. The captain commands it. The team runs it. His authority was real, and every man respected it, and it was still true that his first genuine test was whether the senior enlisted men decided he was worth following. He passed. He asked questions for 3 months before he gave an order that mattered. That is the hardest thing a confident young officer can make himself do. The next one did not pass. He arrived certain, corrected men in front of their subordinates, and confused being obeyed with being followed. The team executed every order he gave and stopped telling him anything he did not directly ask for. That is how a team gets rid of a man without a single word of insubordination. Level 9, Master Sergeant. E8, Team Sergeant, the top of the ladder you actually wanted. 18 Zulu, 12 men whose training, readiness, discipline, and lives were now yours. 15, maybe 20 years in. Gray coming in at the sides. 2 knees that told you the weather. You had spent 2 decades being the man under evaluation. Now you were the one deciding, and it turned out to be worse. Because you were the one choosing who went where. You were the one sending a 24-year-old sergeant into a valley with 5 men behind him. And you were the one who had to account for it when a team came back with a gap in it. You also became the man who decides whether a captain is worth backing, which you had watched from the other side for 20 years and found much easier when it was not your call. The first real decision you made as a team sergeant took about 11 seconds. 2 valleys, 2 halves of the team. One of them was going to get the harder half, and you had to say which men went where, out loud, in front of them. You had spent 20 years learning weapons, languages, tactics, and planning. None of it prepared you for the arithmetic of putting a name next to a place. You picked well. It went fine. And you sat in the operations room for 6 hours afterward with nothing to do but wait for a radio call, and understood that this was the job now. Not doing. Waiting for other men to do, on your say-so. The paperwork was worse than the waiting. Every risk you accepted, you wrote down. Every man you sent out, you signed for. And if it had gone the other way, the document explaining why would have been in your handwriting. You had wanted this rank since you were 22 years old. Nobody had mentioned that the reward for being the best man on the team is that you stop being on it and start being answerable for it. You had reached the top of the thing you spent your whole life climbing, and the view was mostly other people's risk. Level 10, Sergeant Major. E9, the rank that takes it all away. There is nowhere above Team Sergeant except off the team. Sergeant Major puts you at company, then battalion, then group. You manage readiness. You sit in meetings about manning and budgets and equipment fielding. You are responsible for hundreds of men instead of 12, and you are responsible for them from a building. You were the most senior enlisted man in the room, and you had not been on a detachment in 4 years. Younger men came to you for decisions, and you gave good ones, because you had done every job they were describing. And every one of those conversations reminded you that you used to be the one making the drive out. That is the cruelty nobody mentions when you are 22 and signing a contract. The climb does not end with you doing the job perfectly. It ends with you being promoted out of the job entirely by an army that needs your judgment more than it needs your hands. You could remember the last time you were on a detachment, not the date, the smell of it. Diesel, dust, gun oil, and somebody's terrible coffee. A young sergeant came into your office in your second year as a sergeant major, asking about a weapons problem with a partner force. You answered him in about a minute because you had solved that exact problem yourself in 2011. He thanked you and went back to his team. You sat there afterward and understood that you were now the man in the story, the one somebody asks, the one who used to do it. You remembered what the warrant officer had told you years earlier about never having to leave. Level 11, Retirement. The last one, the end of the ladder. There was a ceremony for this too, and it was short, the way the first one had been. They stood you in front of a formation and read out a list of the places you had been. Somebody handed your wife flowers. Somebody made a joke about golf. And then you took the beret off, and that was the end of it. 22 years after a man in a strip mall slid a contract across a desk. Nobody puts this part on the recruiting poster. You did the arithmetic once, at your own kitchen table, because your wife had done it first and written it on the back of an envelope. Around 9 months a year. Gone, back, gone again. Not one deployment and home. 2 decades of it. She was not angry when she slid it across to you. That was the part that landed. She had just wanted you to see the number. You knew what that number did to marriages. Everybody in the community knew. It is bleak enough that the military runs programs whose entire purpose is holding those marriages together. You had been sent to one. It had helped. And it had not been enough for 2 men on your own team. You knew what the years did to the rest of it too. The head knocks, nobody wrote down. The way sleep stopped working, somewhere around year 12. Men putting off retirement and deploying hurt because the world wanted more teams than the pipeline could build. You got very good at a job by being absent from everything else. Your daughter learned to ride a bike while you were on another continent. There is a photograph of it. You are not in it. And somewhere in there, you thought about the man who sat down on his rucksack on day 11. He went home. He got a job. He was at the hospital when his kids were born. He made it to every birthday. He watched his marriage grow old instead of watching it end from 9 time zones away. For 20 years, you told yourself he made the wrong choice. Somewhere around year 18, you stopped being certain. That is the honest ending. Not that it was worth it. Not that it wasn't. Only that you reached the top of the ladder and found the bill had been arriving the whole time, in installments, and you had been climbing too hard to open it. The morning after you retired, you woke up at 4:15. You had woken up at 4:15 for 22 years, and your body had not been told. There was nowhere to be. You made coffee in a quiet house and sat down with it, and it was the first morning since you were 22 that nobody in the world needed a decision out of you. You had spent your whole career learning how to make other people capable of doing something without you. It turned out they had been doing the same thing to you the entire time. There were 3 words over the door of a building you walked into as a 22-year-old, and you never once asked what they meant. Deo presso liber. To free the oppressed. Not to be the strongest. Not to be the deadliest. To walk into somebody else's country, learn their language, sit at their fire, earn their trust, and hand them the ability to take their home back themselves. Every rank on that ladder was building one thing: the language, the rapport, the 2 of everything, the fake country full of real farmers. 12 men who could turn strangers into an army. That had always been the job. You just couldn't read the sign yet. There is another ladder built exactly like this one. 12 rungs. A code of silence. A man at the top who controls everything except his own way out. Except nobody volunteers for that one, and nobody retires from it. That one's on screen now.